car, hoping to keep him safe and out of harm's way. His faithful friend understood and did exactly what the ranger had commanded. Unfortunately, the winds changed and the dog stayed right where he was. The ranger was heartbroken over the loss of his friend. With tears in his eyes and admiration in his voice, he said, "I always had to be careful what I told that dog to do, because I knew he would do it." In the book of Ruth, we see the same type of absolute obedience. Naomi has given Ruth instructions. Ruth responds to Naomi's commands in chapter 3, verse 5, and says, all that you say, I will do. And because Ruth obeys Naomi, Boaz becomes their provider and redeemer. This book of the Old Testament is recorded for our learning in Romans 15:4. And as New Testament Christians, we can learn a lot from Ruth. Ruth has committed herself to action in one simple statement. She is going to do something. And Ruth has set a precedent for Christians. Just like Ruth, Jesus expects his followers to do something. You might say, I don't use bad language. I don't drink. I don't lie. And I don't steal. But in order to be fully obedient to Christ, we must do something. Well, what are we called to do? Jesus said in Mark 10:45, "For even the Son of Man did not come to serve, or did not come to be served, but to serve." Jesus came to do for others. If we are followers of Christ, shouldn't that be our life's purpose too? Titus 2:14 says that Christians are Jesus' own special people, zealous for good works. Not only are we called to serve and do good, we are supposed to be happy and excited about doing it. As Jesus ministered here on earth, he was zealous, and he went about doing good. In Acts chapter 9, we read of a certain disciple named Dorcas. Verse 36 says, she was full of good works and charitable deeds. Because of her service to others, Peter prayed for her life to be restored. Dorcas enjoyed making clothes for those in need. That was how she served. That was her talent. You know, God has blessed us each with talents. Romans 12:6 says that we each have different gifts or talents, and that each gift is because of God's grace. 1 Peter 4:10 says, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another. So God expects us to serve with our talents. Remember the parable in Matthew 25:14-30? The parable tells of a master who is leaving home to travel. He entrusts each of his servants with a certain amount of money, also called talents. To the first servant he gives 5 talents. To the second servant he gives 2 talents. To the third servant he gives 1 talent. The servants who received 5 and 2 put their money to work and doubled their talents. Their master was pleased and rewarded them. The servant with 1 talent, well, he did nothing with his money, and he hid it. The master was not pleased with him, however. The servant was punished and sent into outer darkness. So what's the difference between these servants? Well, the first 2 servants did something with their money. The third servant, well, he did nothing. As followers of Christ, we are expected to do something with the talents and abilities God has blessed us with. If we don't do something with our talents, they become worthless. You know, being a Christian is not a Sunday-only job. Church is not just a place to go. Each member of the body is blessed with different abilities. Paul wrote to the brethren in Galatians 5:13, they should serve each other in love. Paul often compared the church to the human body. Each member of the body has a different job, and each member is equally important. The worst thing that can happen to a body is if one of its members becomes sick or broken. This can cause death to the whole body. For a body to be healthy, each part must be doing what it is supposed to do. The church, Christ's body, is the same way. Each member must be working and working properly. In the last part of Matthew 25, we see the return of Christ on his final judgment on all nations. On the right, Jesus places the sheep, or the right piece. He tells them that they will inherit their reward. He says, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was a stranger, you took me in. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was sick and in prison, you visited me. Then the righteous asked, Lord, when did we do all these? And Jesus told them, while you were doing it for the least of these, you were doing it for me. But on the other side, on the left, Jesus puts the goat widows or the unrighteous. He says to them, I was hungry, you did nothing. I was thirsty, you did nothing. I was naked, sick, and in prison, and you did nothing. What had they done to deserve everlasting punishment? The answer is, they had done nothing. Ruth did something, Dorcas did something, the 2 and the 5 servants, 2 and the 5 talent servants did something. The righteous did something. Will God be able to say to you, I knew you would do it? Friends, there are a whole lot of bad things we can do to keep us out of heaven. But sadly, many souls will be doomed to hell because they wasted their lives doing nothing in the service of the Lord. As followers of Christ, there are certain things we must do to be saved. We must put our obedience to work. Don't you want to work till Jesus comes? Don't you want to hear him say, well done, my good and faithful servant? So let me ask you, all that he says, will you do? Thank you.
Have you ever heard the phrase, you have to give respect in order to get respect? My dad is constantly sharing these words of wisdom to inspire me and help me do the best I can each and every day. Yeah, sometimes I might not get them right off the bat. I might have to stop and ask myself, how does this one apply to me? And then sometimes I catch myself thinking, how in the world did he come up with this one? Oh well, back to the idea of giving and getting respect. What is respect? Is it just being nice? Is it doing what someone wants me to do? A chore? A favor? Respect can be shown by a number of traits or qualities. Webster defines respect as high or special regard, or the quality or state of being esteemed. When you respect someone, you will go to great lengths to make them happy and satisfied each and every time you are around the person. You will do everything in your power to satisfy them so this person won't think bad or lose confidence in you. We see throughout the Bible that respect is addressed numerous times. Let's look at a few examples. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, we read, Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. For this is the law of prophets. Every single human being is worthy of respect and dignity. People don't have worth because they agree with us. They have worth because they are humans created in the image of God. One sad fact is that Christians don't always practice respectfulness very well. Too often, we think that the rightness of our argument gives us license to belittle the person with whom we disagree. When talking to non-Christians about religious topics, we can sometimes make our arguments cutting and personal because we might feel backed into a corner while trying to defend our Christianity. When we do this, we are not just sinning against the other person. We are sinning against God, our Creator, who fashioned that person into the likeness. We see in James chapter 3, 8 through 10, But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men, who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. From these verses, it is evident that Christians can fall into the trap of using an uncontrollable tongue. With this behavior, disrespect can and will occur with those we interact with every day. We can all agree that our world seems to be moving away from this respectful attitude that I introduced earlier. It seems each and every day we hear adults and children voicing opinions that are very disrespectful to those around them. The use of words and actions from non-Christians and sadly Christians are published daily on social media with no respect to others who read or observe their sinful behaviors. If we are truly going to live the Christian life, we must respect God and His commandments. What God says, we must do. We must respect our parents and family members we represent with our daily actions. What our parents ask from us, we must do out of love and respect. With a respect for someone comes a willingness to serve that person. Think of someone you highly respect. Is it a parent, a relative, a teacher, a coach, or a friend? You know without a doubt you would go to great lengths to serve or help enrich that person's life. Just as the relationship between Ruth and Naomi in the Old Testament, it was evident that Ruth had a high level of respect and love for Naomi, where she wouldn't have given up an opportunity to return to her own mother's home. Instead, Ruth wanted to go to a new land and live with Naomi because of her servant's heart. In verse 16 of Ruth chapter 1, we read the account. But Ruth replied, "Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you will die, I will die, and there I will be buried." Later on in chapter 3, verse 5, we see where Ruth, out of respect, love, and servitude, tells Naomi, "All that thou sayest unto me, I will do." As we travel through this life, we cross paths with many different people. Select individuals will gain our friendship and trust. From that, a bond will be made based on respect, love, and servitude. In conclusion, we should always try to have a respectful attitude that leads to a servant heart that Ruth possessed. If you take one single thing that I have told you today, take the time to be respectful to those around you. You have no idea the impact you can have on someone's life. Respectfulness will lead to love, which will create the heart of a servant in each and every one of us. Thank
you. Ruth chapter 3, verse 5. All that you say to me, I will do. The book of Ruth is recognized by many as being one of the most beautiful stories in the Bible. It is a story of love, devotion, and loyalty, where these three things may not be the norm. In this book, we read of Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi. They find themselves in a bit of a financial peril as widows. They must find something to do to support themselves. Naomi develops a plan to arrange a marriage between Ruth and a wealthy Boaz. She gives Ruth very specific instructions. Ruth then replies in Ruth chapter 3, verse 5, "All that you say to me, I will do." Ruth's willingness to follow Naomi's instructions leads to a successful marriage with a wealthy farmer, and it puts Ruth in the lineage as an ancestor to Jesus himself. In parallel to this story, we see ourselves as humans who should follow God's instructions, all of them. Disobedience to God comes in many forms. It comes in willingly disobeying God. It comes in ignorance of God's word, and it comes in trying to improve upon God's word. All three of these are sinful in God's eyes. Saul was a man who sinned by trying to improve upon God's word. Saul was God's own chosen king of Israel. God had a plan for Saul of how he was to lead God's people, further his cause, and open up channels of blessings for us. We read an interesting story of Saul's disobedience in 1 Samuel chapter 15. God gives Saul very specific instructions. They are, "I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he lay wait for him in the way, when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy everything he has. But slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." Remember, Saul was to destroy all that Amalek had. Saul and his army were victorious over the Amalekites. And the Bible tells us that Saul utterly destroyed all the people living, except one. He took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, as a living prisoner. Saul and the people also spared the best of the livestock and did not destroy these things, for they destroyed everything that was worthless. God informed Samuel of this heartbreaking news when the morning came. Samuel rose to meet Saul, and quite an interesting exchange was passed between the two. Saul greets Samuel with these words, "I have performed the commandment of the Lord." Samuel then replies with a stunning question. "Now what is meant by the bleating of sheep in my ear and the lowing of oxen which I hear?" Can you imagine that at this point? Saul is maybe getting a queasy feeling in his stomach or getting a little nervous. He then replies, trying to cover his disobedience. They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people have spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen, to sacrifice them to the Lord thy God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. It is interesting here that Saul tries to place the blame on his army, saying, they have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people have spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen. And he includes himself in what might be just a fraction of the obedience, saying, for the rest we have utterly destroyed. Such explanations might be enough to appease human commanders, but God was not appeased by Saul's half-hearted obedience. Samuel informed Saul of the gravity of his sin. Again, Saul tried to defend himself by saying that the livestock brought back was as a sacrifice unto the Lord. Samuel makes a very clear message to Saul when he says, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings as in sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than to sacrifice. He then informs Saul that God has rejected him as the king of Israel as a punishment for his sin. In this story, we learn the importance of doing what God says, doing all of it, not only part of it. We're not trying to improve upon what God says. In Psalms chapter 119, verse 6, we read, then shall I not be ashamed when I have respect unto all thy commandments. Like the story of Saul, God has given his people today a similar message. Do exactly as I say. Keep my commandments. He has given us specific instructions that will lead us, further his cause, and open up channels of blessing. And ultimately, it will lead to our salvation. It is necessary to follow all of these commandments to receive that salvation. Let us not be like Saul and try to improve upon God's word, but let us be like Ruth and practice all that you say to me, I will do. This evening, are you doing everything that God commands us to do? If not, or if you need the prayers of the church in any way, come forward as we stand and sing.